Several family members have come to believe that our youngest son, age 5, has autism. This is mainly because he was a late talker, though he talks almost incessantly now and seems well adjusted socially. Thomas Sowell and others have argued that autism is becoming something of a fad diagnosis and that the autism spectrum allows many children to be diagnosed who probably shouldn't. It kind of reminds me how every bouncy kid gets labeled as ADHD. I've heard that some in the reform world believe that autism is a spiritual disease to be dealt with by counseling, not medical treatment. For these and other reasons, I'm reluctant to have him tested. So here's my twofold question. As Christians, how should we think about autism? And do you have any thoughts on nouthetic counseling?
Yeah, let me start with the last question first. I'm an advocate of nouthetic counseling. I appreciate the pioneering work that Jay Adams did, and I would describe
Can you
myself.
define what that exactly
Nouthetic
means?
counseling is geared off a verse in Romans where the saints are competent to counsel one another, which is the name of Adams' book. And nouthetic counseling, basically, you could summarize it by saying that in counseling people, it's important not to leave out the sin issues, and so a corollary to that, it's important not to have the counseling event become a vast exercise in helping the person who's receiving counseling escape responsibility for his actions. So nouthetic counseling, basically, it'd be wrong to say it's confrontational. It's confrontational where it needs to be, but you are helping the person take responsibility for his own actions, for his own choices, for his own life. And you're doing this in the context of grounding it in scriptural teaching and biblically based counseling. So that's different. It's counseling that's explicitly rooted in Scripture, as opposed to what you might call thin veneer, psychobabble with a thin veneer of Christian terms laid over the top, which is not something I'm a big fan of. So that's what nouthetic counseling is. Now, having said that, and identifying that I'm there and I'm an advocate of nouthetic counseling, I'm wary of every one-size-fits-all approach. Even if you say you've got to help people take responsibility for their actions, there are biological, physiological reasons for some people's behaviors. And you have to take that into account. So nouthetic counseling, if it goes to seed, thinks that you can fix every problem by tinkering with the soul, right? Just get down in there and confront the heart and confront the soul and have them pray. That's the ditch on that side of the road. We are body, soul, and spirit all together. Our bodies affect our souls affect our spirit affects the body again. So there's nothing wrong, in my view, there's nothing wrong or unbiblical by taking into account a possible physiological component to some disorders or some problems. The point is that doesn't excuse anything. There's a hidden Pelagianism that affects a lot of this. The reason people are looking for a genetic basis for homosexuality is they think that if it's in my nature, and I can't help it, then therefore I'm not responsible for it. Well, that's Pelagianism, pure and simple. We already know that heterosexual temptation is something we can't help.
Right.
Right? Heterosexual temptation has a genetic basis. 13-year-old boy didn't ask for the testosterone bath that washes over him. Before, all he was interested in is getting another paper route, and all of a sudden it's girls, girls, girls. That's genetic. But why do we assume that if there's a genetic basis for it, that I'm not responsible for it? So that's so much for the counseling and responsibility and so forth. The other factor in this is I like the term in the question, Fad Diagnosis.
Yeah, I was curious about that because it does seem like the fad diagnosis is something we see a lot of, but what makes people have an actual desire for it to turn out that they be sick with these disorders, where you're exaggerating the symptoms to...
Well, whether it's a fad diagnosis of mild forms of autism or allergies or gluten intolerance or lactose intolerance, whatever the Fad Diagnosis du jour is. You get to talk with your friends about it. It's a topic of conversation. You get to be the center of attention. You get to be an object of sympathy. People have been trained to rally around when you label a problem that you have by an acceptable tagline. So this is not to say, if you remember the first part of my answer, this is not to say that there's no such thing as autism, but we have hundreds of thousands of people Googling things up and self-diagnosing things, and a generation ago you couldn't have found some, who do you know that had gluten problems a generation ago, and now every third person has, sorry, I'm just not buying it, and that doesn't mean, and we should forestall any angry letters. If I'm saying that people are getting copycat diagnoses, it's cool to be lactose intolerant, or it's cool to have a problem with this or that or the other thing. That does not mean, it does not follow from that there is no such thing as a real lactose intolerance or a real allergy. It's just we just need to be, I think, more tough-minded about things like this, and not put things on a spectrum and say, well, I've got 1.7 degrees of autism on a scale of 15.
So how would you advise this particular family then, where they got people are telling them that their son might be autistic, they don't see it? How would you advise them?
Well, I would say if they've got a happy, well-adjusted kid, then don't go looking for answers when you don't have questions, right? If you're labeling the bouncy kid, or what would have happened to Tom Sawyer if he'd gotten into the hands of the professional counseling establishment? He was sitting there in class having a hard time paying attention. The day went on and on, and we give things fancy medical names, and we can't call it looking out the window syndrome or wish I was fishing syndrome. I remember with agonizing clarity that kind of experience when I was a boy. It's called being a boy, and and they're trying to civilize me, and now we diagnose, and we feel justified in doping them up. We don't know how to discipline boys, we don't know how to handle boys, and so we hit them on the head with a chemical rock. And oftentimes a quick and glib diagnosis justifies rushing in with pills, rushing in with drugs, and government schools that have drug-free zone on the front door, and that same school has a full-time nurse.
And half the kids on a Ritalin IV.
half the kids on Ritalin, and a full-time employee administering drugs to the kids. It's just a spectacular joke. Something has gone seriously cockeyed in this. And then, again, not to say that there aren't genuine cases requiring judicious use of medication. So number one, I'd say, if you don't think you've got a problem, if you're happy with your family, if it's not broke, don't fix it. If something comes up where you think we really ought to have this looked at, then I would do some research to find a biblically minded Christian doctor who would be in sympathy with some of the concerns that you might have.
Can you think of some questions that you might use to examine potential doctors to try to sort out where they are on the spectrum? Or this is somebody who's going to dope at the drop of a hat, or this is somebody who shares your skepticism?
Well, one of the questions would be, are you quick to prescribe or slow to prescribe medication? Are you an advocate of the better living through chemistry school of thought? Are you an absolutist? No, under no circumstances will I ever prescribe something. I just lean against a one-size-fits-all approach. I think the purists who say you should never take medication for anything that would affect your soul. Well, what about a migraine? Right. Suppose you've got a spiritual problem snapping at the kids because you've got a headache. Is it a sin to take asprin? Right. No.